Hello and welcome to the Southern Institute of Technology's academic program, the Certificate in Small Business Management. Today we're looking at the aspect of finance. We're off to meet Graham Dick of MCINTYRE Dick & Partners to discuss with him this topic.
My role here is what's called managing partner, so I'm elected by the partners annually for responsibility of managing the affairs of the office to achieve the objectives as set out in our business plan.
When dealing with finance, what are the main areas that we're looking at?
If we talk about finance for small businesses and perhaps businesses that are establishing, finance is just one aspect of an overall business plan. And there's several aspects to that. There's obviously the finance needed to establish the business. There's the finance needed to keep the business running. There's finance in regards to collecting cash from people who owe us money. There's finance in getting the right ratio between debt and equity. And all those factors have to be looked at as part of putting together a business plan.
So what would be the initial financial process that someone looking to set up a small business would have to undertake?
It probably starts as part of the planning process that they need to have carried out a business plan, because if the planning's not carried out thoroughly at the beginning, the chance of survival can be reduced. And as part of that planning process, they will need to consider what their finance needs are. How much do they need to spend on plant and equipment? How much on marketing? What's the rent going to cost? And out of that process, they then develop a budget, which they can then talk to their advisors about as to how to best meet the needs of that business.
So roughly how much capital would you advise someone to have when setting up a new business?
I mean, every situation's different. The greater the amount of borrowed money, the greater the risk, obviously. But a good commercial ratio might be, say, 50% of their own money and 50% borrowed money. Anything higher than that in terms of borrowed money just creates a greater risk in the early stages of a business.
So when looking to borrow money, how do you know what bank's right for you?
Banking is probably very similar to a dentist or a doctor. You need to establish a relationship, a rapport with your banker. It needs to be someone who can understand your business, relates to you, communicates to you, and at the end of the day you have trust in. That's the crucial item.
So how do you work out the portions of expenditure within the company so you're not spending too much money in one area?
Well, again, that'll come back to the planning process where you start with a marketing plan. That's absolutely crucial to make sure that the market is going to demand your product. And as you work through the marketing plan, and then out of that is the production plan, and then there will become a finance plan. And as you work through that process, the amount that you need to spend on each category, whether it's rent, insurance, advertising or whatever, will become a lot clearer. There's no rule of thumb. Every business is different. Just
going back to the debt side of things, how do you know when you've bitten off more than you can chew?
First place it'll be recognised is probably in your current bank facility. If you have an overdraft, then maybe you're not coming out of overdraft on a monthly basis, or the overdraft is getting bigger. It's what the banks call as a hardcore portion of overdraft, that you're always in overdraft. That would be a sign that the profit is not being generated, because if the profit was being generated, your overdraft would be floating in and out of funds on a regular basis.
How much % of the business profit should be channeled back into the business?
Again, there's no fixed formula. It comes back to your planning, what your needs are year 1, 2 in terms of new plant, equipment, investment in new technology or new products. That's the factor that then determines how much is needed in terms of reinvestment. And once you've done that, you've then got to say, where's it going to come from? And it's either going to come from profits you've generated or out of additional borrowings. So you can't say there's a specific percentage. You've got to look at each business and each year on its merits.
Can you explain to us the different forms of taxation?
As far as taxation is concerned, there's a number of different types of taxation that a business is involved with. If they're operating as a company, then there is company taxation. If they're employing people, then there's PAYE taxation. If they're registered for GST, then there's GST taxation. There could be instances when there's resident withholding tax. If they're operating as an individual, then there's personal rates of tax, which will apply with different rates of tax dependent on the levels of income. So that's a real area where it's crucial that someone setting up a business liaises with an advisor in the early stages.
When setting up for business, how do you know how much you can claim back on for tax purposes?
Well, again, that's a matter of working with your advisor during that initial planning stage, because part of the planning stage is to factor in the projected profit, and if you're making a profit, you've got tax to pay, so you have to factor into your cash flow how much to keep aside for tax, and that's where advisors will be able to help you as to what you can claim for tax purposes and what you cannot.
You're speaking about advisors. Who do you recommend as a good source of advice?
Being in business by yourself can be very lonely, because who do you talk to? And I'd recommend that people need to establish a group of people that they can talk to. I mean, your accountant, your financial advisor is one. There are a number of people offer them, so their skills as mentors. Your banker is another one. In some cases it may be your lawyer. In some cases it could be a family friend who's in business. You need to surround yourself with those people to be able to discuss issues.
Could you tell us what happens at the end of a financial year?
At the end of a financial year, for income tax purposes, they're required to complete a set of financial statements and prepare a return of income and file it with the Inland Revenue Department to determine the liability for taxation at that time. And so at the end of the year, it's a matter then of getting a clear cut-off of the stock that's on hand at the end of the year, what accounts you owe as a business, what accounts are owing to you in your work in progress. Then your accountant is able to put those together into a set of financial statements. But the real key for someone in business, they need to know throughout the year how they're trading and how they're performing. To leave it to the end of the year is in fact too late. The end of the year is required for income tax purposes, but for business management purposes, they need to know monthly or quarterly throughout the year.
Do most small businesses handle their own bookkeeping, or do they use accountants?
Majority would do it themselves. There's a lot of very good computer programs that are reasonably simple to operate around there. And with them having to do GST returns 2 monthly or 6 monthly, it forces them to keep their records neat and tidy. So majority would be doing it themselves.
So is that the key, keeping good records to look back on?
Absolutely, because if you've got good up-to-date records, you're actually more in control of your business rather than just leaving everything and looking at it 6, 9, 12 months later. That's too late. If something's gone wrong, it's too late to fix it. If you can see some trends developing that are not favourable as you go throughout your 2 monthly or quarterly sets of accounts, then you've got a better chance of fixing it. So being on top of your bookwork and recording and knowing your financial performance and position as you go throughout the year is critical.
If you've just set up a small business and you're actually the only person in it, how do you go about paying yourself? Do you just take money for yourself from the takings, or do you pay yourself as though you were an employee?
There are several options as to how you can remunerate yourself when you're setting up a business. Taking wages and paying PAYE on a monthly basis is one option. Another option is to take what's called cash drawings out of the business on a fortnightly or monthly basis. And that's cash that you're drawing out of the business in anticipation of making a profit, which you know as you go throughout the year or at the end of the year. And then there's a reconciliation between the profit earned and what you've drawn out. But again, that's where it's important to discuss these issues with your advisor as part of setting it up. Either way, they have an impact on the cash flow, because if you take, for example, drawings on a regular basis, then there's every chance you will be in what's called the provisional taxation regime, where the tax payments are paid progressively throughout the year, but at different dates to PAYE. And those factors all need to be included in your cash flow projections, and that's why you need to discuss those options with your advisor.
It's time to look at our first business. STATIK Hair Design has been restyling the South for the past 5 years. Locally owned and operated, STATIK has a team of 4 hair professionals.
We opened in 2002 when I was actually currently working at a hair salon, and it's been 5 years in the process now of owning and running the business.
Did you know much about business beforehand?
Not a lot. I'd been in the industry now for 16 years, but I'd worked with other salon owners that were really quite business savvy, so I was quite lucky to learn from them over those years. And what I didn't know, I went out there and got quite knowledgeable quite quickly I got books from the Invercargill Public Library, some really good wee props that I've brought with me today, and it's the Be Profitable in Business book here. So that was essentially a really good guide for me to learn from.
Initially, how much did you know about the financial aspect of business?
Oh, not a lot. The information that I gained, I was aware that when you are interested in opening up your own business, that you're entitled to go along to your accountant. So the hardest process really was choosing someone from the Yellow Pages. And once I decided upon which accountant I wanted to use, I went in there for around three sessions of trying to understand finances for businesses. Right. So it was good.
So what sort of things did you cover in those sessions?
In those sessions, obviously, have I looked at a business that was already existing to purchase, and all the demographics to that? Did it have staff? Had I gone to an agent and seen what the annual turnover to that business was? I decided that I actually wanted to open a salon, which was even more harder, and I had to gain all the information through the accountant as to what it was going to cost me to start it up, how many staff I'd need, was there room for a salon, another one in Invercargill. Right. So it's quite huge.
So what's the next step you take then after seeing the accountant?
Of course, everybody needs money. You've always got a little saved for a rainy day, but I had to then put together a business plan of all the information needed in order for somebody like a bank to back you financially. So if you're needing to help with starting up a business, the banks around town were really, really good to go and see. Once again, you had to have quite a good business plan. You had to show what your strengths and weaknesses were. You had to show a lot of the research that they needed to decide whether or not you were a good person to invest in. Was really knowing what your industry was capable of and what the region down here specifically needed, in the sense of what you could offer as a regular ongoing turnover with the clients.
How do you know how much you should borrow without overcommitting yourself?
Yep, okay, that's a real tricky one. What I did was, I was really lucky with my accountant. I took him with me, so we'd nutted out my business plan together. He'd told me how much I could borrow up to, as well as working with the bank manager, so it was really a negotiable situation. Ideally, you always want more. The old saying out there is that you should always have double what you need for your initial startup costs. So the equation there that we use was, say your startup cost was something like 20,000. Well, then you should have in the bank as like moving money all the time, at least 40,000 saved. So you had to sort of work out what your wants and needs were from the initial opening.
How can you predict how much money your business is capable of making?
It's really hard because it's all hypothetically. It was the figures that we took back. We were using hypothetical figures of, there are so many salons in Invercargill, so you divide it out by the ratio of what your population is, and then you're working out what your starting price for haircuts are. So it was actually, it was the accountant really that picked it out of thin air and said, right, this is what I see you doing sales at. And they have this graph also at your accountants that show like a medium in New Zealand, what your turnover is, what a good turnover salon is and what a bad turnover salon is, depending on how many staff you have.
So how do you know how much you're able to pay yourself?
How do I know? My accountant tells me. I always want to pay myself more, but depending on what our sales coming in for the month are as to what we've actually bought from supply companies, it all gets evened out. I send all that information into the accountant's firm, and then they in turn back and let you know, okay, this is how much you can afford to pay yourself from what you've been doing.
What have you found to be some of the biggest hidden costs?
For me personally, it was the things like the plumbing. You've got to make sure that when you are starting up your business, that you've looked at things like the Invercargill City Council, their requirements. For a salon, you've got to have certain aspects and criteria met. So the plumbing and that was a wee bit excessive. Electricians, sometimes if they haven't quite got the right product, you've got to get something else. And so I thought that, for me, they were the two things that I found really hard. Also, your staff as well. You just don't know quite what their needs are until you sit down and work it all out. Then you can have an overview of that first 3 months, exactly how you've gone with your spending.
Does staffing have to fit round how much money the business is making?
It is an important aspect. A lot of, especially in hairdressing, you know, your staff have to be productive. You've got to know how to obviously upskill your staff, so you've got to always keep that momentum going with them. But yeah, that is an important aspect.
How closely do you monitor your bookkeeping?
Yep, it's one of those tedious tasks in business. I'm sure everyone agrees that you really do have to have your finger on the pulse with it. You've got to know exactly where you are at all times. So for me, that was really important, was knowing those figures. Initially in my first year, I had no idea. I was always going to my accountant all the time, and then I sourced out a computer system that I can just touch any button now and get an instant report, and I find that's given me a lot more professional, it makes me feel more comfortable every day knowing how the business is going.
So do you handle most of your own finances now?
Yes and no. I do tend to lean on my accountants quite heavily. They're my professional people. They're the ones that are going to steer me in the right direction, and they've got all the knowledge there. So I hand everything over to them. We then have a meeting and discuss how we've been going. Have I got any new ideas? Do I need more resources? And we work out what's best for the business in that way.
What tax considerations do you have to have when in business?
Yep, okay. Initially, you've got no idea at all. Once again, I've got all the information from the accountant, but what I do is I'm obliged to fill out my employee monthly schedule every month. By the 20th of the month, it must be handed into the IRD as well as the PAYE, and I get that from my employees' wages book. As far as the GST goes, I send that along to the accountant when I've got to code bank statements, and then pop them off to the accountant, and he does the GST returns every 2 months.
What about paying staff? How does that aspect work?
Yep, okay, I pay my staff on a weekly basis. So what I do there is we have like a weekly timesheet. I put that into their employment box, the wage box, and then I pay them either up to them actually, whether it's done through internet banking or if they'd like the cash in hand.
Southport New Zealand Limited is the southernmost commercial port in New Zealand. It operates on a year-round 24-hour basis. Situated in Bluff, it generates approximately 12% of New Zealand's total exports.
Southport's the port operating company located in Bluff. We handle all the cargo, or majority of the regional cargo that comes in and out of Southland. Southport's been in existence since 1988 when it was listed on New Zealand Stock Exchange.
So how many staff are employed by Southport?
Southport has 45 full-time staff, and we also at times employ a number of casual staff members as demand requires.
In a company of this size, what sort of financial structure do you have in place?
I think we have a financial structure very similar to any company. Southport's financial structure would be very similar to any small organisation. It's just the scale of the type of structure that we have in place, the systems that we have, and the amount of data that we record and use to manage our company.
So what are some of the systems that you have in place?
We have all sorts of systems. We have, of course, our general ledger system, which is the main financial system that calculates or allows us to produce our balance sheet and our profit and loss. And behind that we have a number of subsystems, our debtors, creditors, wages, and sitting alongside that we also have a number of inventory control systems or inventory management systems that help us with all our warehousing functions, and also what we call a terminal system, which is a system that we track all our container movements and things through the port with.
So how many financial advisors would you need for a business of this size?
Well, to give you an idea of our scale of admin and finance people, we have a finance manager, and below that we have 3 other administrative people that assist the functions, or the administrative functions and financial functions for the organisation. And when required, from time to time, we'll use external parties or consultants to help us with some of the specialist areas that we might get involved in as a company.
So how do you estimate what the budgets for each department are?
Well, that's one of the more significant tasks, I suppose, that most members of Southport participate in. We've only just recently been through that process where we have looked at our business and entered into a budget preparation period. It takes us about a month to prepare our budgets, where we look at all our activities. We liaise with a number of our customers, or our more significant customers, to get a feel for their cargo activities or their requirements of us over the next 12 months. We do that by division, so each of our activities we look at closely. We then build a budget around that, so we can estimate our likely sales income and all the costs associated with those sales to finally arrive at a budgeted profit for the year. Yeah, so it's quite a significant task for us to undertake, and probably very similar to a lot of other organisations our size.
So how do you monitor that the company's overheads aren't more than what it's taking in?
Well, that's part of what we use our systems for. I think a lot of people have a perception that accounting or finance systems are just to produce your profit and loss or your balance sheet at the end of the year, and that you work out your tax from that. But we use our systems to manage the business. So we collect a lot of data through all the various systems that we've got, and make sure that we're always comparing those against our budget. So how our business is actually, or the costs and sales that we're producing from our activities are always compared or benchmarked against our budget. So we use our budget as a measuring tool to make sure that we're controlling our costs appropriately.
So is that also how you work out how much you can afford to spend on staffing?
Yes, it is. You know, that's another important part of our budgeting process, that the activities that we undertake, or we forecast that we're likely to undertake, we set our staffing levels around that. And again, that allows us to measure, again, our actual staffing costs against where we budgeted for those to be.
You mentioned before that Southport was on the stock exchange. How does that work?
Yeah, we are one of the only companies in Southland listed on New Zealand Stock Exchange. All that means is that we have raised our capital via an issue to the public. So the public we've said we'd like to fund our business publicly. This allows us to set our share price. That share price is then traded on the stock exchange. So that's how we obtain some of our funding. A lot of other businesses, probably smaller businesses, raise their capital via the owner or the proprietor, and maybe by raising funds via bank loans or debt from bank.
So who are you accountable to then when it comes to financial records?
Southport has a board of directors. The management of Southport report to those directors, and those directors are charged with looking after the interests of the shareholders. So ultimately we are our shareholders are the people that we're working for, and the board is charged with the governance of that and making sure that that the management of the company is carried out in the best interests of the shareholder.
And can you explain to us how GST works within a business?
Any transaction that's undertaken, there's a criteria that you have to be to become registered for GST. Southport, of course, is definitely registered for GST. Our turnover is something like $15 million a year. So any service or activity that we enter into with a third party, we are required to charge 12.5% GST on top of that. So we basically collect that on our sales, and we're able to claim it on any of the costs, or the 12.5% cost that our suppliers charge us. At the end of a 2-month period, we have a bit of a divvy up, and would like to think that normally we're in a position that we've collected more GST than we're going to claim, meaning that we've had more sales than we've had costs, and we would then pass that difference over to their net revenue.
So how does a business like this know how much of its profit should be invested back in?
Part of what we do is, of course, our shareholders invest in us and expecting to get a return, so we look at that. But we also have to have enough cash or investment in our infrastructure to ensure that we can still generate a profit for our shareholders in the future. So our board actually looks at that every year, and looks at where our profit levels are, what sort of activities we expect that we're going to need, or what sort of cash we're going to need to continue to fund the business into the future. And a decision is made at that point as to a dividend payment to our shareholders.
So now we've met our businesses, it's time to ask, What are some of the pitfalls to avoid when dealing with finance?
There's been a few pitfalls, the knowledge or the lack of it really. You know, when you're opening your business you think that you know a lot of things, but in actual fact, if you're out there with no professional people like your accountants and your bank managers and the good core networking group, you can get yourself into quite a lot of big trouble financially really, really quickly.
Always ensure that you send your invoicing out as soon as you've completed the job. Cash flow for business is one of the most important aspects that you must keep your eye on.
So, what advice can they give us for dealing with finance?
There's been quite a few lessons. When you're making mistakes or you've made mistakes, you really need to learn from them, and quite quickly too. Another thing that I've really learned and that I learned about and really value is the old 80-20 rule, to always look after the 20% of the backbone to your business. Don't worry about what the other 80% is. If you're out there all the time trying to market to them, you're going to lose their interest to your 20%. So that was a really important key factor there. The other thing is food for thought, books. You always need them to feed your mind for growth. I found that the Marketing for Success was really good, but the biggest thing that I really enjoyed looking at was actually the Foundations for Growth, because once you're in business, it's easy to start, but you've got to stay in business. That's the hardest thing. So definitely, like finding the research out there and giving your mind more food for thought is a really positive lesson that I've learned.
A lesson I've learned in my experience with finance and business is that you must keep your records up to date, or you can lose your way.
Thank you for watching the Southern Institute of Technology's academic program, the Certificate in Small Business Management. If you'd like more information about this course or any other offered by Sit to Learn, you can contact the team at SIT on 0800 Sit to Learn. Join us next week. We're going to take a look at marketing. See you then.